the next presentation this afternoon is titled Best Practices for Protecting the Worker and will be delivered by Dr. Justine Taylor. Dr. Taylor has worked for the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers since 2011 and currently oversees the science and government relations pillars for the organization. She obtained her PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Alberta and has a wide range of experiences across the physical and life sciences. A strong supporter of collaborative efforts, Dr. Taylor has roles on a number of boards and committees, including being co-chair of the Horticulture Value Chain Roundtable, vice chair of the Canadian Horticultural Council Greenhouse Vegetable Committee, and a member of the board of directors on both the WeTech Alliance and the Multicultural Council of Windsor and Essex County. So now I would like to welcome Dr. Taylor, and I'll pass over the reins to you.
Thanks, Kara. Everybody can hear me okay, I'm guessing? No complaints?
Yes.
So I do have a slightly different title. This is what happens when you ignore your emails and don't respond in a timely manner. So my title of my presentation today will be COVID-19 Best Practices, the Second Wave and Beyond. So I'm going to start with a little overview of where we're coming from, what did we learn over the last 6 months, and where are we going? So where have we been? All right. So starting in March, as an organization, we acted quickly to ensure that our members had access to the most up-to-date information on COVID-19. As you can imagine, this was quite challenging because information was changing on pretty much a daily basis. So the type of information that we provided to our membership was pretty wide-ranging. We provided public health guidance and requirements as they evolved, all regulatory and legislative requirements, workplace planning tools, so this includes things like best practices, response planning, as well as communication tools. We also endeavored to provide tools directly to employees, as well as providing our members with information and support program that would help them with adaptation. So in terms of the communication strategy for this, which was really critical. It was really important, I think, in the early days. Well, it continues to be important to ensure that we were communicating frequently with our membership, as well as all the stakeholders that we work with. So for our members, we did this by having email updates 2 to 3 times a week with any new information that arose during that week. We have a dedicated website of resources. We also had a weekly webinar and continue to do that to ensure that our members had an opportunity to ask questions or to raise concerns if anything was to come up. We also endeavored to ensure that there were employee supports available. So we have an app called Hub Connect that is aimed at both temporary foreign workers and newcomers to provide them with a network of resources in the rural communities in which they live. So the app is available in multiple languages, and we did update it with COVID-19 information. And we also have a shared drive with multilingual posters. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So throughout this pandemic, sorry, I'm having trouble managing my notes here. On our website, we began to develop a set of tools for our members, and these had a couple of different themes. So first of all was, and most critically at the beginning of the pandemic, where this was evolving very quickly, was guidance on the temporary foreign worker program. So as I'm sure you are all aware, there was a travel ban put in place, and then one that was then opened up to allow temporary foreign workers to enter the country. There was a number of quarantine requirements that were put in place. So ensuring our members knew what those requirements were was really critical to responding quickly. As I mentioned, we developed some tools for employees, workplace planning tools. There are a wide range of workplace planning tools that we have provided to our members. Public health guidance, as it evolved, was updated on the website. Business-to-business opportunities, so helping growers to find resources when they need them, as well as support programming and recruitment resources. I'll just step through a couple of those sites on our website. just to give you an idea of what they look like. So in the business-to-business section, really what we were looking to do there is to provide our membership with access to resources. So those resources could have been PPE. There are a number of local, provincial, and federal resources in order to access PPE. Could be hotels if growers are needing to quarantine incoming workers, laundry services, food services. It's basically just a catch-all for any opportunities that we were made aware of that might help our members. Support programming, this one's pretty self-evident. Obviously, this was something that evolved quickly over the course of the pandemic, so we really endeavored to make sure that all the up-to-date information was available on the website. The next one, recruitment tools. So as a result of the travel ban, many of our members experienced delays with being able to access or to be able to receive employees under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, as well as there were disruptions to workforce as a result of outbreaks. So we want to ensure that our members had access to recruitment tools if they needed to source a replacement workforce. So we have provided to our membership a list of both regional, provincial, and federal level tools to help them with any recruitment that they might be endeavoring. I will say it is fair to say that most of these tools that we have provided to our membership was a bit of a data dump. You know, we wanted to make sure that people had access to any information that they needed, rather than curating any of the specific information about recruitment or services, etc. What we did to address some of these issues was that we did develop a set of best practices. This was rolled out at the end of March and kind of refined over the month of April. Excuse me. So in addition to the standard hand washing, sneeze guides, etc., that was being provided from public health, we also developed some guidance specific to farms. So first was health screening of both your workforce and of visitors, which is obviously now a standard practice. So making sure that all incoming visitors to your farm are screened for symptoms, contacts with positives, and travel history. The second one was promoting increased sanitation practices at all locations. So cleaning and disinfection, really with a focus on any high touch areas. Social distancing where possible. Obviously, this is a major tenet of the public health strategy. So social distancing where possible, but also the use of PPE and barriers where it's not possible. Looking at amenity scheduling as well as staggered shifts and breaks. Establishing employee cohorts, as well as providing on-farm services to reduce the number of trips that are needed into the community. Ensuring sufficient PPE is available for both on and off-farm use, and ensuring that employees are trained on how to use that PPE. Communication of the importance of all of these measures to both the workforce and visitors. So this includes signs, having meetings with your workforce, having policies in place, and delivering training. And lastly, response planning. So making sure that you are prepared if you do face an outbreak. So this could include establishing isolation facilities, ensuring that workforce has access to support tools if they are required to quarantine, as well as deep cleaning protocols if you are facing the results of an outbreak. And we really encouraged our members to ensure that these measures were put in place, not only in the workplace, but also in the bunkhouse, and were observed when they went into the community. So despite all best efforts, there were outbreaks. So what did we learn? So what we learned over the past 6 months was that the vast majority of on-farm outbreaks were a result of community spread. So this is instances where either employees were going into the community and bringing the disease back, or the visitors were coming on farm and bringing the disease with them. We identified that contract workers moving between locations is a major risk. We also learned that it's really important to think about mitigating risk during transportation. So how are employees traveling to and from the farm? How can we mitigate the risks there? One of the major positives that we did learn is that the majority of farms inspected have implemented the appropriate control and prevention measures. So that's a really positive result of the large number of compliance inspections that have happened over the past 6 months. However, we do recognize that lack of awareness and cultural attitudes is a barrier to changing behaviors. So I think we need to do a better job to ensure that everyone can access the most up-to-date language. And we need to recognize that individuals may have fears regarding institutionalized medicine and/or government policies. And while they might not make sense to us, they do exist, they are important, and they need to be addressed. So addressing the second wave, where do we go from here? So first of all, the first step is to ensure that we're heightening awareness of all of the control and prevention measures on farm. So everything that I mentioned previously, we need to make sure that everybody is reminded that those steps are important, and that we don't begin to let our guards down now that we think the worst of it has passed. And again, those need to be reinforced at all levels, in the workplace, in the bunkhouse, as well as in the community. We need to ensure all employees are trained on these new measures and understand the importance. We're going to, as an organization, continue to promote government resources. So there are a vast number of resources that are available at multiple levels of government, both in agriculture as well as in public health. So we continue to promote those tools to our membership. We need to ensure that all materials are prepared in the appropriate languages and formats. And we need to ensure that they are delivered in a culturally relevant manner. So what we really need to understand are who are the influencers that speak to our international workforce. I think getting the messages, the public health messages across to that workforce is critical, and we really need to deliver that message in a way that's going to resonate. So I mentioned earlier some of the tools that we have developed for our employees. This is just an example of some of the tools that we have available. So we have a large number of posters and written documents. They're available on a shared drive in multiple different languages. But we do recognize that there is a need for more video resources. There are some literacy issues that need to be addressed. So we continue to work with multiple levels of government and public health agencies to ensure that we are meeting the needs of those video resources. And on the right-hand side, there's also just a little picture of the Hub Connect app, which we continue to update with the most recent COVID-19 information. So continuing on, what else are we doing? So we will continue to reduce the risk of contract employees by limiting employment to one farm. And this is a proposal or policy that is included in many of the Health Unit Section 22 orders across the province. We're going to ensure that recruiters and temp agencies are taking the appropriate control and prevention measures. So this means really ensuring that those agencies also have access to the same information that we're providing to our membership, and that they're aware of what those best practices are. And we also need to ensure that there are regional response plans in place, including shelter resources in high-risk areas. So this really means working with our regional community leaders and healthcare providers to ensure that support system is there in case there are further outbreaks as a result of the second wave. So as a result of our experiences over the last 6 months, we have developed a set of guiding principles to help us tackle both the second wave as well as the 2021 season. So number one, we need to ensure that we're providing evidence-based adaptive guidance. We need to recognize new information as it arises and adapt to it. Status quo isn't going to cut it. Second, critical communications. Consistent and effective communications with all stakeholders is critical. We really need to resist the urge to silo. And we're just as guilty of it in agriculture as they are in healthcare. And it's really critical that all of the stakeholders work together to address this very complicated issue. And lastly, governance and decision making. So this is critical to adapting and responding quickly to any new information that is gained. And we really need to have leaders at all levels. We need leaders on farms, we need leaders in the municipalities, in the province, and at the federal level. So where are we going? So in addition to the second wave activities I mentioned, there are a number of other activities and initiatives that we're undertaking. So first of all, in the short term, we need to ensure that travel requirements are clear for outgoing and incoming employees. So we need to understand what is required for employees here under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program to travel back to their home countries now. And we also need to understand what the requirements are for incoming employees in the 2021 season. We need to ensure the process to amend employment documents is clear and accessible. So in cases where temporary foreign workers cannot travel to their home countries because of travel disruptions or fear, we need to ensure that there is a clear mechanism by which to extend those work permits, LMIAs, or visas. So there is a process in place. It is quite complicated. I know a number of our members have had difficulty accessing it and navigating it. So that's something that we'd like to work with the federal government to make sure that process is accessible. Housing reform. So this really covers a mix of activities both in the short and long term. And I think we'll need to explore a mix of regulatory and best practice tools in order to see success on this front. So most directly, we have a federal review of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program requirements for housing. So that is ongoing. We expect that that will take some time to get the proposals put in place, but that is underway. In addition, there are a number of regional and provincial public health measures that are either being put in place today or are being developed for future guidance for 2021. So as agricultural stakeholders, we're involved heavily in that process and are driving towards solutions that will help improve public health outcomes. And lastly, we need to, with respect to housing reform, we need to recognize that there is a need to influence behavioral change. So while we can put in place infrastructure that might reduce the risk of communicable diseases, we need to recognize that there is also a need to influence behaviors. So really reinforcing the importance of social distancing, or wearing PPE when you're in high-risk situations, and limiting your social circles. Those messages will be critical to ensuring success in a congregate living facility. So preparing for the 2021 season, really we need to ensure that requirements are made clear well in advance. We don't need to be caught short. We have time now to plan for that season, and we need to make the best of the remaining months. In the longer term, ensuring that all agri-food employees have access to health and wellness supports will be really critical. And so in this context, wellness includes wraparound care, so things like dental, foot care, mental health supports, just to name a few. And I think one of the things we've come up across, both as a result of COVID and even before that, is that it's really critical to make sure that both employees here under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, as well as healthcare providers, understand that the majority of temporary foreign workers do have access to OHIP immediately upon arrival. And as a result of COVID, that it is actually immediately upon arrival. We need to ensure that employees here under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program are supportive and have an effective mechanism to voice concerns. So we recognize that there are existing channels by which temporary foreign workers can voice concerns, but as we have seen, unfortunately, in some recent media coverage, there are often barriers to accessing those complaint mechanisms. So we really need to ensure that employees are aware of their rights and know how to access supports when they need to. And lastly, we're keen to work with multiple levels of government to ensure that recruitment agencies and temp agencies are regulated as one part in a series of steps to address abuse of undocumented and vulnerable workers. That is it for me. I just have the link there to our COVID website if anybody is interested in the resources that we've put together. As well as my email address. I'm available until 2 o'clock on this forum, and then unfortunately I have to jump onto another call. But if you have any further questions that I wasn't able to address, please feel free to shoot me in an email, and I can always get back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Justine. That was great. Lots of information, and clearly there's a lot going on. So I have a question here for you. What do you see as the biggest challenge for greenhouse vegetable growers in the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I think, I'm going to keep my answer focused on COVID because I'm assuming that's the intent of the question. I think one of the largest challenges will be navigating housing reform. Housing is mandated by the federal government for the temporary foreign worker program, but as a result of this public health issue, local health units have the ability to supersede those requirements and put in place their own requirements through a Section 22 order. So in some cases, we've seen that those requirements are quite onerous and have put growers into a difficult position in terms of being able to adapt quickly to reform, retrofit their housing to meet the new requirements. So I think in regions where quite aggressive measures have been put in place, growers are really struggling to be able to either find new housing, expand their housing, retrofit the housing to meet those requirements. And I think that will be a significant challenge over the next 12 months as that reform process continues to roll out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another one, another question we have here is, it has been reported that labor shortage will reach 123,000 by 2029. Are there any plans to shake the government to address that other than regulating already heavily regulated area?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think agriculture in general has struggled with employment attraction and retention for many, many years now. These are difficult jobs, I think, to sell to many Canadians, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. So certainly, I know the federal government has an agri-food employment strategy that they're aiming to roll out. That was mentioned in some of the economic strategy table work that was done, as well as CFA and CARC also have a national level employment strategy that they're rolling out. It really ends up being a multi-pronged strategy. So in addition to ensuring that the temporary foreign worker program is functioning as it should, we also need to look at attracting youth to the sector. And I think part of that, which I've seen in kind of our local region with the local workforce boards, is getting a better understanding of what job seekers are looking for. Aside from just wages, that's easy. But the reality is that job seekers look for a lot of other things. So like workplace flexibility, job flexibility, childcare. These are all things that kind of factor into an employee's decision on where they want to work. So I think if we do a better job of taking in that input and seeing how we can make those jobs work for our sector, or how we can tailor our jobs to meet the needs of those employees, will likely be critical to gaining success in that area in the future.
Great, thank you. So another question, so that Hub Connect app seems like a really valuable app. And so is there anything that can be done, or anything you would like to see done that can help promote it, promote its use and increase its value?
Yeah, so it's a good question. We've had, I think, fairly limited uptake of the app to date. I think we have about 1,000 downloads in Ontario, which we would like, obviously, to see grow quite significantly. I think it's really important to ensure that employees understand the value of the app. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation we're in now, where we need to get more users on the app so we know what's valuable to the users, so then we can put the valuable things on the app. So we have been talking to various public health agencies, both at a regional and provincial and federal level, to see what can be done to embed more critical information in the app. So if there are critical public health updates that can be rolled out through the app, then that will encourage more downloads, and then people will begin to see more value in the app. So that's kind of the strategy we're taking now. A lot of discussions are happening right now with multiple different partners to see how we can further develop the app. I think with the evolving nature of COVID best practices, it has the potential to be a really effective way to ensure that we're delivering information directly to employees. Because right now we are relying on employers and or other agencies to promote the app and to sing its praises essentially. So I think ensuring that we make sure that app gets into the hands of the end users will be really critical.
Great. Okay, and I have one last question here. So what can be done by the government to support producers through the next phase?
Oh boy, that's a big one. So I think that the answer is that there are a number of tools that the government could help support, or a number of programs that the government could help support the sector with. So first of all, looking at the temporary foreign worker program, we need to ensure at a federal level that the isolation support program remains in place as long as the Quarantine Act is in place. So that funding is really critical to helping employers to ensure that they can provide isolation facilities and all the required supports to their workers while they are quarantining in that first 2-week period. I think housing reform is certainly an area that the government could help support on. So we all recognize that any changes that are made to existing housing are going to have costs associated with them. So I think adaptation programs that help us to undertake those changes will be really critical. As well as, I think one of the most critical roles for government is helping the sector and regions, for that matter, to respond in times of crisis, essentially. So if we are faced with any other large outbreaks, that there is a response plan in place, and that the government is there to help us navigate that response and ensure that there are all the critical supports are in place to help with that response.
Great, thank you. So one last question. So we heard in the presentation before yours a lot about biosecurity. And so the focus was on, pathogens related to plant health. So I'm just wondering, if you can comment on how prepared, producers were for a pathogen that affects their workers, considering that.
Yeah, I do think this is something we've said from the beginning of this pandemic, that in many ways we had a little bit of a leg up on this, because all of the tools that we've been putting in place to manage plant health and plant pathogens are also equally effective on human pathogens. So all of those in-out protocols, making sure that surfaces are disinfected, all of that information, it's essentially the same information as what you would use for human pathogens. So I think, frankly speaking, that might be one of the reasons that we've seen such a good result from the compliance inspections that have happened, especially from Ministry of Labor, who's looking directly at workplaces to see if appropriate control and prevention measures are in place. I think a lot of those measures were already in place, and so it's just a matter of adapting a little bit more for the social distancing aspect. But PPE and sanitation are kind of bread and butter in the greenhouse industry, so it's an easy adaptation.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's all the questions that we have for you. And so thank you very much for your great presentation and for all the information that you've shared.